This is Radio Prague International coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sierra Krieger-Wolf and you're listening to Czechia in 30 Minutes, the show where we give you a rundown of what's recently been happening in the country in just half an hour. Coming up on today's show, hundreds of Czech television and Czech radio employees came to work dressed in black on Wednesday to protest proposed changes to the funding of public service media. E.G. Menzel's Oscar-winning film Closely Watched Trains turned 60 this year. To mark the occasion, we revisit the railway station where much of the classic movie was shot. And later, we speak to Amanita Design producer Lukáš Konce about the studio's new cardboard-inspired adventure puzzle game, Phonopolis. All that coming up later, but first, here's the news brought to you by Vít Pohanka.
News.
The average monthly wage in Czechia before tax rose by more than 8% year-on-year to more than 50,000 crowns in the first quarter of 2026, according to figures released by the Czech Statistical Office. That was nearly 4,000 crowns more than a year earlier. After adjusting for inflation, which stood at 1.6%, real wages increased by 6.4%. The Czech Statistical Office said the slowest wage growth was recorded in the electricity, gas, heating and air conditioning supply sector. Even so, pay levels in the industry remained well above the national average. All European Union member states, including Czechia, have given the green light to opening the first cluster of accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko announced. The move clears the way for formal talks on issues related to the rule of law and democratic standards. Ukraine officially launched EU accession negotiations in June 2024. Progress had previously been blocked by Hungary, whose opposition eased after a recent agreement with Kyiv on Hungarian minority rights. The decision marks another step forward in Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. The international non-governmental organization Transparency International plans to file a complaint with the European Parliament over a possible conflict of interest involving Czech MEP Alexander Vondra. According to Politico, a news server, Vondra didn't disclose his role as honorary chairman of the Prague Center for Transatlantic Relations in his declaration of private interests. The complaint concerns the think tank's reported funding from Czech defense companies. Transparency International argues that questions arise because Vondra is involved in negotiating key EU defense legislation and has met representatives of the companies. Vondra and the think tank deny any wrongdoing, saying his position is honorary and doesn't constitute a formal relationship requiring disclosure. The complaint is likely to be reviewed by the European Parliament. Employees at the Czech government office will decide later whether to proceed with a strike after being told that a planned transfer of human rights, mental health and addiction policy agendas to ministries can no longer be reversed. Union representatives said the move had been confirmed as a political decision during talks with the government office chief Tinde Barta. While staff had sought changes to the plan, their requests were rejected. Barta said most criticism of the reform was unfounded and argued the transfer would strengthen the affected agendas. The reorganization is scheduled to take effect in July. A Prague court has formally rehabilitated former dissident and prominent Czech politician in the 1990s, Jan Ruml, ruling that communist-era authorities unlawfully detained him on 2 occasions. Ruml spent more than 10 months in custody in the early 1980s after being accused of subverting the Republic over his role in organizing a courier network linking Prague with a London-based exile publisher. He was also briefly detained in 1979 on suspicion of terrorism. The ruling is final. Ruml, a Charter 77 signatory who later served as Interior Minister and Senator, is also entitled to financial compensation. Czech tennis rising star Jakub Menšík will play the biggest match of his career on Friday when he takes on world number 3 Alexander Zverev for a place in the Roland Garros final. The 20-year-old, the youngest Czech Grand Slam semi-finalist of the Open era, faces the German from 2:30 p.m. Menchik reached the last four after defeating Brazil's João Fonseca and has yet to drop a set in Paris. Zverev, a two-time ATP Finals champion, is also chasing his first Grand Slam title. Cloudy skies are expected across the country, with rain spreading from Bohemia to Moravia and Silesia during the day. Daytime highs will range from 16 to 21 degrees Celsius.
Hundreds of employees of Czech television and Czech radio staged protests on Wednesday against proposed changes to the funding of public service media, warning that the measures could threaten their independence and financial stability. Daniela Lazarova has the details.
Hundreds of Czech television and Czech radio employees came to work dressed in black on Wednesday to sound the alarm that their future is at stake and that if the ruling coalition pushes through its planned funding reform, they may no longer be able to fulfill their mission. Black-clad hosts and reporters appeared on Czech television screens throughout the day, and at midday, public media employees gathered outside their Prague headquarters to warn that the future of the country's public broadcasters is under threat. Czech television presenter Daniel Stach said their black apparel symbolized the black screens that the future could bring.
Veřejnoprávní média jsme odhodlaní bránit.
We are determined to defend public service media. We do not want public television and public radio, which belong to citizens, to become directly dependent on the political will of any government.
According to one of the co-organizers of the protest, Jan Herget, the governing coalition claims that it only wants to change the funding system, but the issue goes much further than that, he says. It concerns the values, independence and stability of public service media, as well as the scope of services they provide to audiences. Trade unions and staff representatives of both institutions have already declared an indefinite strike alert over the planned reforms. They warned on Wednesday that these could escalate to a full-blown strike if political decisions undermine the independence of public broadcasting. The protest is against a proposed government reform of public media funding, which would abolish license fees in favour of state funding. Critics of the proposed changes argue that this would undermine the broadcasters' financial stability and leave them vulnerable to political pressure. The measure would also significantly reduce revenue for both institutions. Czech television could lose around 1.4 billion crowns annually, while Czech radio could lose up to 500 million crowns. Czech TV's Deputy Director General Milan Friedrich said the broadcaster would have to lay off between 300 and 500 employees if its budget were reduced by roughly 1 billion crowns. The broadcaster currently employs nearly 3,000 people and operates with an annual budget of 8.5 billion. Czech Radio has estimated that the proposed legislation would reduce its annual income by 360 to 370 million crowns. With a current budget of 2.7 billion crowns, the broadcaster said it would likely have to cut around 200 of its 1,350 jobs and end cooperation with hundreds of freelance contributors. Opposition politicians are opposed to the change of legislation and have said they will do their utmost to prevent its approval. However, the ruling coalition, which has a majority in the lower house, says public service broadcasters around the world are having to economize in the present day and age, and that it is determined to cut both institutions down to size and make them accountable to the Supreme Audit Office for the way they spend taxpayers' money.
Daniela Lazarova with that report. This November will mark 60 years since the premiere of Closely Watched Trains, the Oscar-winning film by Jiří Menzel. The anniversary will be celebrated on the 20th of June in Lodenice, where a large part of the film was shot. Fans of the famous movie and the book it is based on can also explore the local museum of the railway line, open from April till October. Romana Grajcerova has more.
Closely Watched Trains is a Czechoslovak film directed by Jiří Menzel in 1966 based on a novella of the same name by Bohumil Hrabal. Set in German-occupied Czechoslovakia near the end of the Second World War, the story follows a 22-year-old apprentice signalman at a small railway station who struggles with sexual anxiety while gradually becoming involved in the wartime resistance movement. The film adaptation by director Jiří Menzel, starring actor and singer Václav Neckář in the leading role, won the Academy Awards Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 1968. The film was shot at the railway station in Loděnice near Beroun, about 32 kilometers southwest of Prague. Today, very few people would recognize the station as it appears in the film, but according to Loděnice resident Markéta, the film still holds great significance for the village.
Teď je to nádraží přestavěný, ale ještě donedávna to tady fakt vypadalo jako v tom
The station has been rebuilt now, but until recently it really still looked like it did in the film. From what I know from local witnesses, when the film was being shot, Mr. Menzel and the actors used to meet in a pub at the Forge in Chrustenice. It was quite a well-known tavern.
V Chrustenicích to byla taková vyhlášená hospoda.
A small museum is located directly in the station building.
Ta myšlenka vznikla na takové skupině děvčat.
The idea came from a group of a few friends. We gathered a team of people and agreed that, in addition to closely watched trains and the history of the station, there would also be a section about the history of the village.
Taky bude historie obce, že?
Explains curator Alena Heinrichová. The museum interior is divided into 3 sections: the history of the station, the history of the village, and at the very back a room dedicated to closely watched trains.
A tadyhle máte fotografie z filmu.
Here we have photographs from the film. There are photos from the celebrations that took place 41 years later. Over there are 5 photographs from events organized by Czech Railways on the occasion of the filming.
Těch, kteří už tady s námi nemohou být.
It was during the celebrations 10 years ago that director Jiří Menzel spoke in the Czech radio report by Jaroslav Skalický about the filming. He said that the idea of winning an Oscar never even crossed his mind.
Měl jsem štěstí. My jsme s panem šoferem měli jediný cíl, natočit to tak.
I was lucky, Mr. Schoffer, and I had only one goal, to make it in a way that would allow us to shoot another film. We had no other ambitions.
Jiný ambice jsme neměli.
Cinematographer Jaromír Schoffer also recalled the filming, explaining why the creators chose the Loděnice station.
It was unbeatable because of its beautiful intimacy, natural setting and the steep hillside.
People in Loděnice will once again commemorate the anniversary of Closely Watched Trains this year, specifically on the 20th of June.
Thank you, Romana Grajcerova, for that report. This is a reminder that you're with Czechia in 30 minutes, a half hour of news, current affairs, and interesting stories brought to you by Radio Prague International. And now it's time for today's main feature. Ruth Frankova speaks with Amanita Design producer Lukáš Kunce about the studio's stunning new adventure puzzle game, Phonopolis.
Award-winning Czech indie studio Amanita Design has unveiled its latest game, Phonopolis, a story-driven puzzle adventure set in a dystopian city built entirely from cardboard. More than a decade in the making, the game combines puzzle-solving gameplay with a distinctive, handcrafted visual style inspired by avant-garde art. What made the developers choose cardboard as the founding of an entire game world? How do you turn stacks of paper models into a living digital city? And how did a project that took more than 10 years to complete evolve along the way? I discussed these questions with Phonopolis producer Lukáš Kunce. For listeners who haven't come across Phonopolis yet, could you briefly introduce the game and its story and the main characters?
Yes, Phonopolis is basically an adventure game, a puzzle adventure game, like all of our titles. It's very much about the story, about the world, and solving some logical or maybe not so logical puzzles. Phonopolis specifically is about Felix, who is just a regular guy, just a garbage man living in the city of Phonopolis. And this city is very specific or special because it's divided into 3 sort of classes. At the bottom is the workers' quarter, in the middle is the bureaucratic quarter, and at the very top is the avant-garde quarter. And all of this city is controlled by the leader, who is the main antagonist of this game. And the leader is basically a dictator, and he's built a system of loudspeakers all over the city. And through these loudspeakers, he issues commands, audio commands, and controls the entire city. It's basically like a mind control scheme. He has this idea of, making a perfect society, and the execution is very super strict, and nobody has free will and so on. And Felix, the main hero, is just like that. He's also under the control of the loudspeakers until one day he accidentally finds a pair of headphones and he puts them on, and for the first time he just has his own thoughts and sort of starts thinking for himself for the first time and rediscovers his humanity and realizes that this perfect system of the leader is maybe not so perfect, and goes on a journey to stop his plans to sort of control the city forever.
As you said, the story explores themes such as freedom and the abuse of power. What made you want to explore that idea at this particular time? Were you trying to say something about the world that we are actually living in today?
Yeah, I understand why many players will feel like it's very current in today's time. But the truth is that the game was conceived about 13 years ago, so it's not directly, intended to speak about current political issues. But, the truth is it's always been like that in parts of the world. It's just that today it's probably more visible because it's also happening in countries that are closer to us, let's say. And there's also this historical experience as well, definitely. That was probably the key and the major influence on the topic, communism that many of us experienced right here in our country.
The whole world of Phonopolis, including the buildings, the characters, even many of the visual effects, was first created from cardboard and only then digitized. Why did you decide to make the game this way?
There were several reasons why we chose cardboard. One of them was that the team really wanted to sort of take a break from working at the computers and just working on something by hand. The truth is obviously that it's really just maybe 1% or really small amount of work, and most of the work still has to be done at the computer. And the entire process, to put it simply, is that every scene and every level started with Eva Marková, who was the art director and concept artist of the game, and she would draw the scene and the concept art in 2D digitally, and then she would give the concept art to Otto Dostal, who was also one of the main 3 creators with Eva Marková and Petr Filipovic. So Otto would take this concept art flat in 2D and he would sort of translate it into 3D space very accurately and precisely, and basically create something similar to theatrical backdrops, and he would texture them digitally. And then he would take these textures and print them, and using a plotter he would cut out stickers, and these stickers would then be put on a big piece of cardboard, and that's when most of the handcrafted part of the work would happen. And we would paint them over with acrylic paint and create some masks as well, cut them out obviously, and also do a lot of brushing or sanding with sandpaper, sort of give it another level of texture in addition to the cardboard texture, the patina. And then we would take these handcrafted textures basically and take photographs of them under simple lighting, and these photos would be used as textures on the 3D models instead of the placeholders that were used before. And then there was a lot of work in the computer again, because these handcrafted photograph textures still had to be processed a lot in the 3D engine, applying lighting, materials, lots of processing. So that's one of the reasons why the game also took a lot of time to complete.
I also wanted to talk about sound. Music has always played an important role in all your games, I would say, but in Phonopolis, sound is at the very heart of the story. As you said, the characters are controlled by loudspeakers. So what role did music play in shaping the game, and what about the voice acting? Because I think this is actually your first game that features voice acting.
That's very true. Like with all Amanita games, actually the audio, both the music and the sound effects are just as important as the visuals. And every time we play the game and develop the game for a while without the music, then there's a huge difference when the music and sound effects get, implemented into the game. It suddenly gets a completely new life, and we were really delighted to work with Tomáš Dvořák, aka Floex, once again on the music. I think he did a fantastic job. He had to go with a slightly different approach because the city of Phonopolis sort of feels like maybe watching an old movie. There's this lo-fi quality to it. So we try to achieve that using some older devices as well, but not too many of them. But for example, he used an old cassette player that he would run through some of the audio files that he created to again add this sort of specific texture that would be really difficult to add just digitally. Then we had Matouš Godík, who worked on the sound effects, who also previously worked with us on the game Creeks and Samoros 3. I think he also added a lot to the life of Phonopolis. And then for the voice acting, just like you said, it's the very first time we had like a comprehensible dialogue, comprehensible sentences in the game. All the previous games just had like gibberish, sometimes with a little bit of Czech added to them, but no dialogue or no subtitles at all. And this time the team felt like the story needs to be told a bit more accurately because of the more like serious theme and all that. So we decided to go with voice acting, and funny coincidence is that it was voiced by Joe Etchison, who is from the Great Britain. We previously worked with him on the music for Creeks. He's better known as Hidden Orchestra, probably also known to many Czech listeners of music because he's been playing here quite often. And it was a great collaboration because I feel like Joe immediately understood the sort of purpose and the intended tone of the narrator. We sort of told him it should sound like you're a grandfather telling a story to your grandchildren at the fireplace. Even though the topic of the game is quite serious, we try to keep it like more playful and lighthearted than some of the influences that would be Orwell's 1984, obviously, or Zamyatin's We, was still supposed to be more like a fairy tale.
As you said, it's an adventure and a puzzle game, and I know puzzles have also been part of Amanita's games. What opportunities did the cardboard world of Phonopolis give you when it came to designing these puzzles?
That's a good one. I would say that it really helped support the feeling of tangibility that we try to some extent have in all of our games, but the fact that it's actually made from physical material, it sort of feels inviting, for the player to touch the objects and everything. One of the main ideas for the puzzle design and the game design was not to just create puzzles, but sort of like interactive toys or toy boxes that would really remind you of like, childhood toys that you just want to tinker with. So yeah, I would say that the tangibility was one of the main benefits of going with the physical material. And I think it's a different question probably, but the interactivity was one of the reasons we went with this creative method that I explained earlier, because back when the project was conceived, back in 2013, something like that, the first idea how to create this game was a little more different, because the idea was to glue the models in real life together, like actually have real life scenes, real life models, and take photos of them and use them as sort of like sequences of photos, which would still look great. It would still have a very unique visual quality, but there's very strict limit in terms of interactivity. When you just have photos, it limits the interactivity a lot, and going the route of like 3D models, textured, gave us a lot of space to be able to have a lot of touchable and interactive elements in the game.
You said the original idea came 13 years ago. Does it mean that you have actually been working on this game all those past 13 years, or was it an on and off project?
Pretty much. Well, the history is that the project was conceived in 2013 by 3 former classmates from animation in the Zlín University, Petr Filipovič, Eva Marková and Otto Dostal. And for a while they worked on the game under a different studio, but then the studio wasn't willing to finance the project for all of its development, so they were looking for another studio they would be able to create the game under. And they got in touch with Jakub Dvorský, our studio director and founder. And Jakub just really liked the vision, like the creative and art direction. And they agreed to do the game together, which was obviously great for the team because Jakub helped them find a lot of collaborators, as well as giving them the opportunity to work with people like Tomáš Dvořák, Floex, or Matouš, who really, I think, helped the game elevate it to the next level. But basically, the game was being worked on constantly for over 10 years, daily.
And when you are creating your games, are you thinking of your potential users? I'm asking because I know your games are particularly popular among families and children. So do you have the users in mind when you are creating these games?
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of a balancing act, I would say, because we primarily want to make games that we would want to play ourselves, sort of selfishly maybe in a way, but at the same time you can't ignore the fact that you want people to play the games. We're not a studio that would try to follow trends in gaming or anything like that. We just like to do things our way, which seems to have worked for the past 20 or so years, so that's great. And for example, we don't really worry much about like marketing analysis or targeting a specific target audience or anything like that. We kind of try to make things that could be enjoyed by everyone, whether it's small children, whether it's maybe teenagers, adults, seniors, doesn't really matter. The games are accessible in terms of like the control schemes. You don't really need to be like a skilled gamer to enjoy them. It's very much like a very interactive animated movie in a way. And we usually see the best or the nicest kind of feedback from people who would play them with their children. That's always really nice. Even seeing them at events, they would come to the booth. Usually it's the child that is excited for the game, and then the parent joins them and they sort of enjoy the game together. It's always really nice to see.
Are you already working on a new project?
Yes, we actually have been working or operating at Amanita for the past decade or so in like several independent teams. Counting Phonopolis, that would be 3 teams at the moment and a half, I will explain. Aside from Phonopolis, there's 2 other games in development by other teams. One of them is led by Jakub Dvorský, who previously created, for example, the Samaros series and Machinarium and Pilgrims. And the other team is led by Jaromír Plachý, who did the games Botanicula and Chuchel and Happy Game. And then the half team sort of is Radim Jurda, who has been working with us for a really long time now as well. He was the creator and designer and artist behind the game Creeks. And recently he's been working on a board game, like a physical board game based on the world of Pilgrims. It's called Pilgrims Curious Adventures. He's basically been working on it solo pretty much, but also working with a Czech company, a publisher called Pink Troubadour, who has been helping him a little bit with the design and just finishing the game, but most importantly the publishing side of things and the distribution and all that. Yeah.
Do you already know when this will be released?
We sort of soft launched it last year in autumn, September, October, not sure now, but we didn't manufacture that many copies. It was sold out within like a month or so, but now it's coming very soon. At the start of June it's coming back to stock. And first we only had the English version, but now it's going to be regionally available in many regions and language mutations, and that includes Czech language, so yeah, coming very soon.
Okay, thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
Thank you so much.
And that interview with Lukáš Kunce from Amanita Design brings us to the end of today's program here on Radio Prague International. For more news, features, interviews, photos, and videos from Czechia, visit our website at www.radio.cz. You can also browse our full archive of broadcasts and follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram. From me, Sierra Krieger-Wolf, thank you for listening, and goodbye.